These are the KLH Kendall speakers, and these speakers make me wonder if high-end speakers are even worth it. And that's kind of rich coming from a guy who used to sell high-end speakers at a high-end retail. But I have to say, speakers has gotten really good to a point where in 2022, I wonder sometimes if high-end speakers are even required just for performance alone. But we have seen speakers like this that perform extremely well for the money. But not just for the money now in 2022, we've seen speakers that actually perform head-to-head with high-end speakers that cost arm and a leg and maybe a kidney. So it's definitely an exciting time. Sometimes these speakers that cost a lot less do have shortcomings. But will the KLH Kendall have any shortcomings compared to real high-end speakers? And how does it fare to speakers that I already reviewed that I claimed performs at the level of actual high-end speakers? So we'll go into that in this video. So first of all, in this video, we will talk about the sound quality of these speakers and how it fares with other real high-end speakers here and there. And second, we will go into the build quality of these speakers and how it fares in terms of build quality compared to high-end speakers, as well as speakers priced around this price point. Third, we will talk about placement. And last but not the least, we will go into equipment matching to make these sound the best as possible, and also do a comparison with the speakers that I have reviewed in the past that has climbed to the level of high-end audio. Because mind you, even though they are all achieving higher end speaker levels, they all sound different and it all comes down to taste at the end of the day. Performance alone is what I'm evaluating from my perspective, from my experience of dealing with a lot of the high-end speakers, as well as speakers that come in here a lot. I mean, my entire wall of speakers right now. But anyways, let's get into the sound quality of these speakers. Now, sound quality of these speakers are phenomenal. I mean, what can I say? When I first saw these speakers, let's face it, we'll go into the build quality in a bit, but they were kind of dull looking. They kind of looked like speakers that would be in Best Buy. Outside of the really well finished veneering job on these speakers, they kind of look average. Let's admit that. At least to me, it does. And when I placed these speakers, they sounded nothing like they looked. In fact, I quickly typed on my Patreon chat the other day that if these were in higher end cabinets, like it was disguised as a higher end speaker, I would believe it. In fact, the explanation I gave there was totem speakers. And yes, these do have a very close resemblance to one of my favorite speakers of all time, and that's the Totem Tribe Towers. Now, those cost way more, but the KLH Kendall does not fall behind in terms of tone, and the overall presentation as a whole is incredible. Now, for a speaker that is on the quite slim side, it has tremendous amount of bass. In fact, on the KLH website, it claims to go down to 25 Hz plus minus 3 dB, which is insane. And I do have to say that I am a little bit skeptical of that claim, as what I heard was not a full extension down into the 25 Hz region, let alone plus minus 3 dB. That's, I think, quite insane of a claim. However, I do have to commend them for the amount of bass it's outputting in my room. The extension is quite linear, and you do get quite a bit of a punch and dynamics going on in the bass region to where you really don't feel like you're missing out a lot in the bass, especially the upper bass region. However, I wouldn't go far as to say that you don't need a subwoofer with these speakers, because you definitely do need a subwoofer if you enjoy a deep, visceral impact and extension in the bass region. Unlike the Polk R700 speakers that I reviewed recently, it doesn't have that kind of air movement. However, it does have very similar amount of bass, but only in the upper mid-bass region. Now, first impression of these speakers in my room, I definitely thought that they were a little bit lighter in the bass region, as I was listening to the Polk R700s before. Now, the Polk R700 speakers are much bigger speakers both in size and scale and real estate. So I thought that was nothing to be ashamed of. I thought that was normal. However, the initial tracks that I was playing on the KLH speakers were mostly vocal tracks and tracks that didn't really require a lot of bass. Playing tracks that I actually knew had bass in the mix, they were delivering and they were not shy to deliver. These speakers do have bass, but when it only has it in the track. Meaning that these speakers are technically more accurate than the Polk R700s, delivering only bass when it's actually in the track without any emphasis and exaggeration. These speakers are not going to attempt to wow you right away, but rather you will enjoy them and understand that these do have incredible bass as you play along the tracks that you know has bass. So when the bass is in demand, it delivers without a problem, and it's accurate bass. Now when it comes to the mid-range is very clear sounding, and it's all the same to the high frequency, meaning you get really clear high frequency and mid-range with really blackness in the background, which is really rare for a speaker at this price point. I have to say this is some next level shit, as this is some type of clarity that I get on some Focal speakers, magical speakers. It is really clean and very, very, very clear. However, I have to say that the one thing that I do like about this speaker is that even though it's so clear, it doesn't attempt to pierce your ears or fatigue you in a way that some Focals and Magicals do for me on a personal level. And while these do have a metal dome tweeter, it doesn't seem like it's a metal dome tweeter. It's tuned extremely well, just like its brother, the KLH Model 5s that I reviewed. And these do have that kind of quality in the high frequency where it's just about right. And I said the same thing about my Totem Tribe towers, that the high frequency is just about right. And these are just about right. It's almost at the same exact level. But this is all true only when the placement is right, and we will discuss the placement in a bit. But in terms of sound staging and imaging, I find the imaging is very pinpoint and very, very clear. But not only that, it is very easy to discern because of the blackness in the background, as well as the separation in the instruments being an added benefit when it's this clear. Now, when it comes to sound staging, I found the sound staging to be quite wide and quite deep for a speaker that costs $1,500, which is incredible. And while it may not rival horn designs or bookshelf speakers like the CSS Audio 1TDX or the Buchardt S400 Mark II, it definitely has incredible amount of sound staging for a Floorstander, and that comes, I believe, from the slim profile of these Floorstanders. In fact, it is no question that the KLH has a more of a wider soundstage and a deeper soundstage than the Polk R700. But not only that, putting it side by side with a lot of the Floorstanders that are in here for review, the KLH Kendall is a clear winner in terms of sound staging, in terms of both depth and width, giving you a very wide and holographic soundstage for a speaker that is not really horn designed. Now, on a very, very personal level, one thing that I really liked about the speaker is the high frequencies sweetness. I usually don't get this type of sweetness in speakers at this price point. In fact, I don't get this type of sweetness with the CSS Audio 1TDX, even though that speaker is quite sweet on the top end. And I definitely don't get it with the Buchardt S400 Mark II. And those are bookshelf speakers, mind you, which are known to give you a more sweeter sound on the top end than usually Floorstanders. Usually. The Kendalls, by far, are the speakers that I would go to for the high frequency sweetness that people talk about. And paired up with like something like the Doge 10 Mark III, oof. The high frequency is sparkly. It's just the right balance, just on the edge of being bright, but not bright, just on the edge. Just a fine balance right there, and it gives you a very sweet sound that just tingles the back of your hair. And mind you, I listen to speakers all the time, which means that I'm quite desensitized to this feeling of hair standing on the back of my, neck, as people say. And I usually do get that, but only with really high-end speakers that are like really absorb, ridiculous amount of money. Even both of my kidneys will probably not pay for it, let alone my entire organ. But these do. When I hear these, not just the first time, but over and over again, and that sweetness takes that hair from the back of my neck, my non-existent hair, and it gives me a chill down my spine. And that is very rare for a speaker at $1,500 let alone at any price point under $10,000. Now, I am definitely not saying that these speakers are better than $10,000 speakers. Please don't say that. However, these speakers, just by preference alone, I have a very hard time picking between these and the KLH Model 5s. KLH Model 5s are better in my opinion in terms of the overall sound signature and the enjoyment I had with them. However, there's two things that I can't seem to forget about the Kendalls. And that's the bass region that is more in amount than the KLH Model 5s, and the high frequency sweetness that is a little bit more enjoyable and gets me emotionally going than the Model 5s. So that is a hard pick for me right there. Either way, both speakers are incredible, and if you're looking for a more of an all-rounder, I think the Kendalls are more of an all-rounder speaker in my books. But at the time of making this video, and this may change with equipment matching in the future, I would have to say that I still prefer the Model 5s, personally speaking. While the Kendalls are a better all-rounder and technically maybe even a better speaker at a lower price point, I have to say that the Model 5s are more to my preference just because of its sound tone. So I'm extremely careful with what I choose with tone. Tone is the most important thing to me, and that's how natural an instrument sounds to me, as well as how it sounds to me. It's the timbre as well as the overall sound that it emits, and it's mostly in the mid-range that I'm talking about. While the bass does affect that to a certain degree, like in the Sonos Faber speakers. And if you remember, I mentioned that on the Model 5, it is between the Sonos Faber and the Totem, like right in between. So having that best of both worlds does give me more enjoyment with the Model 5s, while the Kendall is kind of like more reminded of the Totem sound. And it's so close to the Totem's tone rather than being in between Totem and Sonos Faber. And for a guy like me that likes both Sonos Faber and Totem's sound signature and tone, I have to say that the Model 5 that falls right in between, that gives me both of the best worlds, is the speaker that I prefer as of now of making this video. Now in terms of the limitations, I do have to say that even though KLH claims this speaker to go down to 25 Hz, I don't think it's quite there in terms of the bass impact and air movement like you get from the Polk R700s, or even compared to higher end speakers that have that weighty bass and extension like the Wilson Audio speakers. It's definitely more in comparison with higher end speakers that is more geared towards mid-range and high frequency refinement like the Totems. And in that department, these speakers do excel very well, and for $1,500 I have to, in a blind A/B test, I don't think I personally can tell which one is a more expensive speaker. It's just that good in terms of mid-range and high frequency refinement on the speaker. Now, however, what I can tell in a blind A/B test without a doubt is Focals and Magicals with these speakers. Focal and Magical speakers are more tilted up into high frequency with more excitement in the higher frequency region, especially with BMWs as well. These speakers are on the fine edge of that, and for a speaker that has a metal dome tweeter, like I said before, I very much prefer these speakers as they don't get bright while having all the details in the world that you possibly need and giving you that sweetness and finesse in the high frequency without that brightness that you might get with Focal, BMW, or Magical speakers. With that being said, that's personal preference for me, and if you are someone that likes a much more brighter presentation, then you might be going for Focals, Magicals, and BMW. No hate there. So definitely, while they may not compete in equal grounds with all high-end speakers, absolutely not. However, they do definitely compete with certain high-end speakers that I have heard that does bring you a very good sound quality and very close to the high-end world without a doubt. So let's go and check the build quality, because that's where I think the pitfall is and where the price range it makes sense. So let's go check that out. So as you can see, this is the Kendall speakers, and as you can see, the build quality is not bad, okay? The veneering job here is real wood veneer, and for a speaker at this price point, the wood finish is done very, very well. Now they have one other finish in black ash, but I definitely prefer this finish. Now they do have a brushed aluminum faceplate for the tweeter, and as you can see the metal dome tweeter right there. And this is a very good design. It looks elegant, it doesn't look too bad, but I'm just not a fan of how the overall chemistry is with this speaker in terms of looks. It looks quite bland, and it doesn't look anything special, and I think that is partially the bass here is quite cheap, and as you can see, the spikes are quite cheap. Now, if you don't want to ruin your floors, they do have rubber feet that comes with it. I've tried it. The spikes, however, sound better. And one thing that you have to realize with this speaker is that you have to level it perfectly, because it will rock. Now I've leveled it, but it will rock, and that does destroy the bass response. So you want to make sure that the speakers are not rocking by leveling the spikes. It does have a Kevlar mid-range and two Kevlar woofers. So they're all Kevlar. They have a really nice texture to them. I'm sure they're not really exorbitant, money in terms of drivers. I believe they're quite inexpensive drivers, but they're implemented very, very well. Now going to the back here, you do see a port, 2 ports, so it is a back-ported design, meaning that you do have to be careful about how you place these speakers, as you do need some space from the wall behind it. But I found that you don't need a lot of space from the wall behind it, to be quite honest with you. I just need a little bit. Now I did like quite a bit of distance away from it, just because it gave you a little bit more of that sound staging and depth. Because you have to realize that when you place the speakers like this, the more you pull them out, the more information it's going to give you this direction, right? It only makes sense. It's just physics. So that's why I like to pull them out. This is about 4 feet, but you don't need to do that to, you don't have to worry about the bass. The bass don't get that boomy when it's close to the wall. It's just more of the preference with the depth perception here. Now in terms of toe-in, and this is where it gets a little bit room sensitive, or more speaker sensitive, I should say. These speakers do change quite drastically when you toe them in and out. Now, as you can see, I have them kind of minimal toe-in, and that's where it sounds best. It sounds most linear and neutral. When you toe them more in towards the listener's direction, that's when you get more of a roll-off, in fact, which means that you actually get less high frequency when you put them on axis, which I found odd, which I found like the total opposite of my experience with other speakers ever. But having them off axis actually gives you more of a high frequency, and you might think, oh, it's your room bouncing sound. My room is very well treated. My room is pretty well treated, as you can see. So I don't think there's acoustic curtains, and so I don't think that is the room. And if that was the case, then I would have that experience with every other speakers in this room. But this is the first time where I see a speaker that actually drops in the high frequency response when you toe them towards you. Usually it's the other way around. Now I don't totally dislike the look, to be honest with you, but I feel like they're too generic. And one thing that I heard from KLH is that there is a lady at KLH, and her name is Mackenzie, I believe. She has really good taste. She's the one that suggested a white bass for the KLH Model 5s, which I absolutely love, and I think they should still go for it. I think they should listen to her more. That's just what I think. Now in terms of equipment matching, I have tried the Doge 10 Mark III, which, like I said, explained in my Doge 10 video. I will link in the description below. It sounds really good with these speakers, like really, really good with these speakers. It really elevates the sound staging and all that to even a bookshelf level, in my opinion. And having tubes is beneficial with these speakers because they're quite sensitive speakers for a tower speaker this size. And they rival like Tektons, which we will do a comparison later on. And here we have the line magnetic back in the house, my Patreon. He's moving away and he dropped it off. Darren, enjoying your amazing line magnetic here. It sounds incredible with these speakers. Not as much bass as the Doge 10, but the mid-range and high frequency and sound staging and tone, just melts my heart. My favorite with these speakers, however, is still the Denafrips Apollo, which is a heavy 100-pound amplifier that is just crazy. Look at the line magnetic. It's crazy. It's even bigger than the line magnetic. It's crazy. It delivers a lot of power, a lot of juice, a lot of headroom for these speakers to play around in the bass region, really giving you really good grip in the bass region while giving you that really visceral impact and really giving you that mid-range and high frequency that you want on these speakers as well. It doesn't give you as much of a sound stage as the tube designs though, and the tone I prefer on the tubes as well. Now, other than that, I think the matching that we can go for is like something even the Iota VX that makes a lot of sense at this price point. It sounds great. It sounds great. It just doesn't have as much of a refinement in the mid-range and high frequency that you would get from like the Apollo or like Magnetic or Doge 10 that I was using for the most part. However, you do get a very good bass response and quite, again, still very mid-range and high frequency refinement with good sound staging. And for the price, it's incredible match. But my favorite match and possibly the best compromise for these speakers was probably the Denafrips as well. Not the Apollo, but the more budget-friendly one here. And this one is really the winner. I think that with maybe a preamplifier combination from the Denafrips line is really good. And that was my favorite for the Model 5s as well. It's by far my favorite combination with KLH speakers so far. It gives you like sound staging and like behind me and all around. It's really incredible synergistically, and so that's what I would recommend with these speakers, without a doubt. Now lastly, the comparisons with speakers like Tekton and Buchardt that has reached the level of high-end speakers in my opinion. Now, for example, let's start with something that didn't quite get there yet, and that's the Polk R700. Now, in my opinion, the Polk R700 is not quite at the level of the high-end audio world because of the mid-range and high-frequency limitations. While the bass is quite similar and quite there in terms of amount and movement of air, it doesn't have the quite refinement on the mid-range and high-frequency like I talked about at the Polk R700 review that I just did. Now, with the comparison with the KLH does have that refinement, however, it's actually the opposite. It doesn't have the air movement of high-end speakers. Now, in that way, it doesn't compare to Wilson Audios or speakers like that, but it certainly does compare to the likes of double impacts, for example. Now, in terms of double impacts, I feel like the double impacts do extend more in the high frequency, while the KLH walks that fine balance of not being bright, but does extend and does have that air. So overall, the double impacts are slightly more brighter speakers with slightly more extension in the high frequency, and mid-range clarity is at the same level in my opinion. So I feel like the tone is the main difference here, and the tone on the double impact, for example, is a little bit more, I would say, natural and a little bit more on the more lean side compared to the KLH, which sounds a little bit more full. And it does have a little bit more towards that totem characteristic like I talked about, which is not as lean as the double impact, which may seem like the double impact is actually more clean, but in terms of clarity alone, I think both are equal grounds in terms of clarity. So which one you like better, which one you find more realistic, will all come down to taste and preference at this point. In terms of bass, they're quite similar. Double impact does have a little bit more mid-bass, visceral impact, but those are huge speakers, so that's to be expected. In terms of air movement, quite to the contrary, I don't think double impacts move as much air as the Polk R700s, like I mentioned before, but it doesn't move as much air as the KLH either. They're on pretty equal grounds. So at the end of the day, in terms of realism, I think a lot of people like the double impact in terms of the overall realism, how real it sounds, especially drums and drum kits. But on the other hand, some other people may prefer the KLH Kendalls in terms of its overall sound signature and how real that sounds. So both sounds real, but to two different individuals. It's all down to preference at this point, which is insane, which is exciting to see, and both are at that level of high-end audio, in my opinion, in terms of performance. Now compared to the Buchardt S400 Mark II. Now obviously the Buchardt S400 Mark II is a bookshelf speaker, but it does have extremely good extension in the bass region, and even more so than the Kendalls. And I was not joking when I said the Buchardt S400 Mark II has more of a bass extension than some of the floor standards, and this is a good example. It does have more extension in the bass region than the Kendalls, but I feel like the bass itself is more effortless on the Kendalls just because it's an actual floor standard design with two ports that's helping it to be more effortless in the bass region. However, the overall bass response, I have to give it to the Buchardt S400 Mark II for being linear, more accurate, and I have to say it's more textured in that way. In terms of mid-range and the high frequency, again, it goes to the Buchardt S400 Mark II in terms of technicality, in my opinion, and how good it is. But I think the Kendalls are not far too behind. And in terms of clarity, I think the Kendalls win there. And in terms of how good it is in terms of realism, again, that's going to be down to preference. I feel like it's more softer of a tone on the Buchardt S400 Mark II, while the Kendalls are a little bit more sweeter, more edge to the sound, more succinct, and not softer than the Buchardt S400 Mark II. So those fans of vocals, magicals, but they find their speakers a little bit too bright, Kendalls might be the one that they choose. Now in comparison to my favorite speakers, CSS Audio 1TDX with these speakers, again, technically speaking, they're very, very similar, but I have to give the edge to the CSS Audio 1TDX in terms of the high frequency refinement and imaging capability. It's just insane. While the Kendalls overall has better bass extension than the CSS Audio 1TDX, just because it's a floor standard design and naturally, again, it's more effortless. However, the CSS Audio 1TDX does have good amount of bass, like just almost equal grounds than as a floor standard, like the Kendalls. Just that I feel like it's more effortless again on a floor standard than a bookshelf speaker. And whichever you go with, I don't think you'll regret it. I just think that it's a preference of that little bit of that bass and a little bit of that tone and realism. Again, very smidge differences here in terms of the overall sound signature and how good it is. I think if you're more into matching it with less expensive equipment, I think I would go with the Kendalls. If you're more about matching it with higher end equipment, I think I would go with the CSS Audio 1TDX, as the scalability on the CSS Audio is more higher, in my opinion, more scale possible as you improve your equipment than the Kendalls. Woo! So that was a fast, real time, comparisons there. But if you have any more questions, make sure to comment down below. I will be happy to answer your questions and chat. If this video was helpful to you, please do click that like button. It does help me out, helps my channel out, and doesn't cost you anything. And make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.